This is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and military operations depicted are entirely fictional. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Share how this story makes you feel. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can reach our next milestone together. Long pause. February 22nd. The key turned hard. Cole Brannick had to lean into the deadbolt with both hands before the lock gave. And even then, the door stuck against the frame as if the building itself had decided against visitors. He put his shoulder into it. The hinges screamed once. A short metallic sound that carried across the frozen yard and scattered 2 crows off the roof of the lumber shed. Pause. The shop smelled like sawdust and linseed oil and 3 months of closed air. Cold had preserved everything. Workbench to the left, tools hanging on pegs in the order his father had kept them for 30 years. Bandsaw against the far wall. Drill press. Clamps racked by size on a slotted board. A half-empty can of marine varnish sat on the bench with the lid pried off and never replaced, as though his father had stepped out for lunch and simply not come back, which, in a way, was exactly what had happened. Thomas Brannick died of a cardiac arrest on October 7th in the cab of his truck, parked outside the post office in Lakemont, Minnesota. He was 64. The engine was still running when the mail carrier found him. His right hand was on the steering wheel. His left was in his lap, palm up, as if he had been about to reach for something and run out of time. Cole stood in the doorway and let the cold settle around him. He was 42 years old, 6 feet tall, lean through the chest and hard across the shoulders from 20 years of carrying loads the Army considered standard and most civilians considered severe. His dark hair was cut short but growing past regulation. 3 months passed, maybe 4. A scar ran along his left forearm from wrist to elbow, pale against weather-darkened skin. Shrapnel, Kunar Province, 2009. He wore a canvas work jacket over a thermal Henley, cargo pants faded at the knees, and boots that had seen 4 countries and terrain he could not describe to anyone without a clearance. He had not been home in 4 years. He had not called in 3. Weary? The reasons were ordinary and unforgivable in equal measure. Deployment, divorce, the slow drift that happens when a man spends 2 decades answering to a mission and then wakes up one morning answering to no one at all. He had earned his Green Beret at 23. He had served with 5th Special Forces Group out of Fort Bragg for 16 years, 6 deployments, 3 countries, 2 Purple Hearts, and 1 marriage that did not survive the final tour. His wife signed the papers while he was in Syria. He came home to a storage unit in Fayetteville and a separation agreement stamped by a judge he had never met. 2 years of freelance security work followed. Contracts in Houston, Phoenix, Norfolk, motel rooms, per diem envelopes. The quiet discovery that a man trained to operate behind enemy lines had no particular talent for operating inside a life. Then his father died, and the phone call came from a lawyer in Duluth, and Cole drove north with a dog in the passenger seat and a plan: repair what needed repairing, sell the property, leave before spring. Titan came through the door behind him. 81 pounds of German Shepherd, 6 years old, yellow-black coat, thick with winter undercoat, dark muzzle, amber eyes. Former military working dog. Explosive detection, 2 tours Afghanistan, handler killed in Helmand in 2018. Cole adopted him through the MWD program 14 months ago. They had been inseparable since. The dog moved through the shop with professional interest. Nose to the floor, systematic, covering the perimeter before cutting inward. Curious, he paused at the bandsaw, sniffed the blade guard, moved on, checked the varnish can, held there for 3 seconds, nostrils working, then dismissed it and continued. He passed the tool wall, pausing once at a cabinet door that hung slightly open, then moved to the drill press, the belt sander, the stack of sandpaper sheets on the lower shelf. Each stop lasted 2 to 4 seconds. Each ended with the same verdict. Known, cataloged, cleared. Then he reached the center of the shop and stopped. The boat was there. Long pause. 22 feet of unfinished hull, white oak and cedar, sitting on cradles in the middle of the floor. The keel was set. The stem was shaped and beveled clean. Planking had begun on the port side. 12 strakes fastened with copper rivets, the rest propped in rough order against the wall. The transom was framed but not skinned. Ribs curved upward from the keel like fingers reaching for something overhead. It was meticulous work, finer than anything Thomas had built for paying customers in his last decade. This was personal. The kind of work a man does when no one is watching and no one is paying, and the only standard that matters is the one he carries inside himself. Cole had not known about the boat. His father had not mentioned it in any of the letters Cole had not answered. 3 letters over 2 years, each written in the same small, square handwriting, each returned unopened because Cole had not trusted himself to read them without calling, and had not trusted himself to call without saying things that could not be unsaid. He walked around the hull slowly, ran one hand along the sheer strake, feeling the grain, the smooth, fair curve shaped by a hand plane and decades of instinct. The copper rivets were countersung and bunged with cedar plugs, each one flush, each one set with the precision of a man who considered visible fasteners a personal failure. Whatever Thomas Brannock had been building in his last months, he had been building it with the full weight of everything he knew. Titan circled back to the starboard side and went rigid. Not the coiled spring of a dog about to strike. He simply stopped. Every muscle locked, ears forward, tail flat and level. His nostrils pulsed in rapid sequence over a plank near the bilge line, fast sampling the air the way Cole had watched him do over ordnance caches in Kandahar and Helmand. Firmly, "What is it, boy?" The dog did not look up. Cole crouched beside him and pressed his thumb into the wood grain. The surface gave. Not much. Maybe a 1/16 of an inch. But enough. Aged white oak did not compress under a thumb. Not cut to hull specification. Not in February cold. He brought his fingers to his nose and inhaled. Curious. Under the sawdust and oil, something chemical. Sharp. Faintly sweet. It did not belong here. Cole stood. He looked at the plank, at the lumber rack against the far wall, at the dog, still frozen beside the hull, waiting, drawn out. The wood under his fingers was soft where it should have been hard, and it carried a smell that had no business being anywhere near his father's boat. Long pause. February 23rd. Lakemont had a population of 2,300 in summer and roughly 800 in winter when the tourists left and the lake froze and the town settled into the long business of surviving until May. Main Street ran 2 blocks, hardware store, diner, post office, library, a bar called Erickson's that had belonged to the same family since 1971. Side streets held clapboard houses with shoveled walks and trucks parked nose in against the snowbanks. The church steeple at the south end was the tallest structure in town. The grain elevator at the north end was the second. Cole drove his truck down Main at 8 in the morning. 11 degrees. Wind from the northwest at 15. Titan rode shotgun with the window cracked 2 inches, nose working the gap. Fenn's Hardware occupied the corner of Main and Tamarack. Pressed tin ceiling, wood floors worn smooth in the aisles, a smell of kerosene and joint compound that had been accumulating since before most of the town was born. Walt Fenn stood behind the counter, sorting lag bolts into bins with the deliberate patience of a man who knew where everything was and resented being asked to prove it. He was 64, built narrow and hard, white hair trimmed flat across the top, hands that looked like they had been carved from the same hardwood he sold. 20 years, Army, 1st Infantry Division, Gulf War and Somalia. Retired Sergeant First Class in 2003. He had known Thomas Brannick for 30 years. They had fished the lake together every June. They had argued about hull designs over coffee at the diner every Tuesday. "You look like your old man." "I get that." "You here to sell?" Cole set a hardware list on the counter. Bracket stock, marine-grade stainless screws, 2 tubes of 3M5-200 sealant, a dozen copper rove nails. Firmly, "I'm here to assess." Walt pulled items from the shelves without needing to search. He set them in a row, receipted each by hand on a yellow pad, and pushed the bag across the counter. He had something going at the end, Cole. Pause. Slowly. "Something besides the boat." I asked 3 times. He said he'd tell me when it was finished. Then he went and died before anything got finished. Firmly. "What kind of something?" Quietly. He was making calls, driving to Duluth, spending afternoons at the county office looking through records. None of it had anything to do with building a hull. Pause. Quietly. And he stopped coming to Tuesday coffee. First time in 12 years. When? September, right around the time Dale started making his offers. Did my father talk to anyone else about it? If he did, he didn't tell me. And your father told me most things. Walt straightened a bin of washers that did not need straightening. Slowly. I asked him once if he was in trouble. He said no. He said he was building something. I assumed he meant the boat. Titan had been sitting by the front door since they entered, upright and patient. Now he rose, crossed the aisle on quiet feet, and walked directly to Walt. He sat beside the old man's leg and leaned his shoulder in. A deliberate, measured contact. Not sniffing, not investigating, choosing. Tender Walt looked down, quietly. Yours? Adopted. Former MWD. He's got good judgment. Walt rested one hand on the dog's neck for a moment, then straightened. His face shifted, not softer, harder in a different direction. Drawn out. Dale Erickson's been asking about that property since September. Pause. Slowly. Your father was still alive in September. Long pause. February 24th. Cole returned to the shop at 6 in the morning with a thermos of black coffee and a flashlight. He had slept 4 hours. The motel heating unit cycled on and off at 40-minute intervals, and each time it kicked, he woke reaching for a sidearm that had not been on his nightstand in 2 years. Titan was already working. He had started at the lumber rack on the east wall before Cole had finished his first cup. Curious. The rack held 30-odd planks and boards stacked vertically, sorted by species. Oak, cedar, mahogany, ash. Some rough cut, some milled to specification. Stock Thomas Brannick had accumulated over years. Bought at estate sales, traded from builders down the coast, stored for the right project. Each piece marked in pencil on the end with species, grade, and date. Titan moved along the rack with his nose 2 inches from the grain. Slow. Systematic. He paused at the third board from the left, sniffed hard, moved on. Paused at the 7th, moved on. Then he reached the far corner where 3 wide planks of white oak stood propped against the wall, and stopped. His front paw scratched the concrete once, then again, harder. His nostrils flared in rapid pulses, working the air around the boards in the fast cycle pattern Cole recognized from hundreds of detection exercises in the field. This was not curiosity. This was a trained response. Firmly. Such. The dog did not need the command. He was already locked on. Cole pulled the first plank out and laid it across the sawhorses under the overhead light. He pressed his thumb along the grain at 6-inch intervals. 14 inches from the end, the wood gave. Uniformly, across the full width of the board, as if something had been applied to the surface and allowed to soak in. He pulled the second plank. Same response, same zone, same degree of softness. Third plank, identical. 3 out of 30-odd boards, all from the same delivery, all compromised. Cole photographed each board under the light, measured the soft zones with a tape, noted the lot numbers penciled on the ends in his father's handwriting, OAK-WH/A-15/08.15, all 3 dated August 15th. Same batch, same delivery. He sat on a shop stool beside the sawhorses and pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. The same pocket sized right in the rain he had carried on every deployment since Kandahar. Green cover, waterproof pages, pencil clipped to the spiral. Old habit. Intelligence officers used laptops. 18 series Green Berets used pencils. Because pencils worked in dust and rain and the back of a moving vehicle with no power and no signal. He wrote down what he knew. 3 boards treated with a chemical accelerant, something designed to break down wood fiber over weeks, not days. Application was deliberate and uniform. It followed no natural pattern of rot, moisture damage, or weather exposure. The treated boards were located in the far corner of the rack, away from the door, away from the workbench, positioned where a casual visitor would not handle them, and a busy boatwright might not reach them for months. In Special Forces, they called this a pattern of life. Before every operation, before every village assessment, before every FID engagement, you established the baseline. What was normal? What was expected? What belonged? Then you identified the anomaly, the thing that did not fit the pattern. The anomaly here was not that 3 boards had gone soft in a cold shop. Wood did not go soft in cold. The anomaly was that someone had made them soft on purpose, and had done it carefully enough that a man who worked with wood every day might not notice until the boards were already built into a hull. Cole looked at the boat. If his father had used these boards without checking, if he had planked them into the hull on the starboard side where the bilge line sat, the wood would have failed within a year, maybe less. A hull failure on water was not a structural inconvenience. It was a sinking. He picked up his phone. Firmly, "This is Cole Brannock, Thomas Brannock's son. I need to know who had regular access to the shop while my father was alive." Quietly, "Dale had a key." Nora Lindgren's voice was calm, careful, quietly. "Your father gave it to him years ago. They used to share equipment, planer, thickness sander. Dale's company stored some material in the lumber shed. When was the last time Dale used the shop? I don't know exactly. Your father mentioned him coming by in August. I remember because it was unusual. Dale hadn't borrowed equipment in over a year. Long pause. 3 boards, all treated. All from the load Dale Erickson personally delivered to the shop on August 15th. Cole set the phone down and looked at Titan, who was still standing beside the lumber rack, watching him with the flat patience of a dog who had done his part and was now waiting for the human to do his. I know, Pausvir quietly. I heard you. March 1st. 6 days since Cole arrived. Dale Erickson came to the shop at 10 in the morning, driving a silver Tahoe with dealer plates and parking it in the yard as though the gravel were a formality. He was 58, tall and lean, silver hair combed back neatly from a high forehead, charcoal wool overcoat, polished boots, leather gloves he removed one finger at a time. His face was narrow, clean-shaven, lined around the eyes in a way that suggested authority rather than hardship. He carried 2 cups of diner coffee and a smile that arrived before he did, warmly. Cole. He said the name the way uncles say names at reunions, fond, familiar, and slightly possessive. He extended one of the cups. Warmly. Black, if I remember. Your dad was the same. Thanks. Dale walked the shop floor slowly, coffee in his left hand, right hand trailing along the workbench, touching tools and surfaces with the casual intimacy of a man who had spent time here and wanted everyone to know it. He stopped at the boat and stood looking at the hull for a long time. He talked about this one, said it was going to be his best. Pause, warmly. I watched you build your first birdhouse in here, Cole. You were 9 years old, used too many nails, and your father didn't correct a single one. Short pause, warmly. 11 nails in a box that needed 4. He kept it on the shelf in the back office. The detail was precise. It was also aimed. Pause. Cole said nothing. Titan lay between them on the concrete floor, not blocking the space between the 2 men, but occupying it. Body flat, chin on pause, eyes tracking from one face to the other without settling. I'll be direct, Dale set his cup on the bench. The marina expansion is good for this town. Jobs, year-round tourism, infrastructure. The waterfront hasn't seen in 20 years. Your father's parcel is the last piece of the corridor. Without it, the project stalls. With it, Lakemont has a future that doesn't depend on ice fishing and 3 months of summer renters. He named a figure. It was generous. 30% above the county assessment, enough to settle the estate, cover the back taxes Thomas had deferred, and leave Cole with enough to drive south and start over somewhere warm. I know it's soon. I know it feels wrong to discuss numbers this close to a loss. Slowly. But a boat-right shop without a boat-right is just a building losing value every winter. Every month you hold it, the maintenance costs go up. The insurance goes up. The county gets less patient. Firmly, how patient are they now? Quietly, Dale's expression did not change. Patient enough. But patience has a calendar, and calendars have deadlines. Cole looked at the boat, at the 12 strakes his father had fastened by hand with copper rivets he had shaped himself, at the tools on the wall, still in the order they had held since before Cole could read, and at Titan, lying on the floor between them, body flat, chin on pause, eyes tracking from one face to the other without settling, occupying the precise midpoint between buyer and seller as though trust were a spatial problem a dog could solve by positioning. Sighs. Maybe selling was the right call. Maybe a clean exit was what a man who had spent 20 years deployed and 2 years drifting had earned. He had no boatwright's license. He had not built anything with his hands since a field shelter in the North Carolina mountains during Robin Sage 15 years ago. The shop needed a new roof within 2 years. The electrical panel was original. The insurance was lapsed. Weary. It was the practical decision, the smart one, the kind of decision a former master sergeant who had managed million-dollar equipment budgets and 12-man teams in 3 countries ought to make without sentiment. Weary. Firmly. I'll think about it. Warmly. Take your time. Dale smiled. It was warm and controlled and intended to close the distance between them. Warmly. I'm not going anywhere. He left. Cole stood alone in the shop. The coffee on the bench had stopped steaming. Outside, the Tahoe's engine started, smooth, expensive. The sound of a vehicle that had never carried lumber or towed a trailer, or sat in a frozen driveway waiting for a man who would never come out of a post office. Cole walked to the boat. He put both hands on the gunwale and leaned his weight into it. The hull creaked once on the cradles, a small, wooden sound, the kind a structure makes when it tests its own strength against a load. Tender Titan lifted his head. One ear forward, one relaxed. He looked at Cole with the steady, unhurried attention of a dog who had heard everything said in the last 30 minutes and classified none of it as trustworthy. Yeah. Pause. Tender. I know. He picked up Dale's cup and poured it down the sink. He did not make the call. Long pause. March 3rd. The letter arrived at 9 by courier. A man in a gray sedan, not from Lakemont, handed Cole an envelope marked Erickson Development Group, LLC, and drove away without a word. 3 documents inside. A letter from Greg Holt, attorney Duluth, expressing concern regarding structural conditions at the Brannock property. A preliminary zoning compliance request filed with the county planning office. A notice that a county building inspector had been assigned to evaluate the shop and adjacent structures. Inspection date, Friday, March 7th. 4 days. Frustrated, Cole read the documents at the motel table. The language was polished, neutral, aggressively professional. No threats, no ultimatums. The letter opened with "Dear Mr. Brannock" and closed with "We look forward to a resolution that serves all parties." Between those 2 phrases sat 4 pages of regulatory citations, zoning codes, and references to county ordinances that, taken together, spelled a single message. Your building is a problem, and problems have deadlines. The zoning request was worse. It cited the property as currently non-compliant with Section 14.7 of the Lakemont Commercial Activity Code, which required any structure classified as a commercial workshop to maintain active business registration, liability insurance, and a licensed operator on file. Thomas Brannock's business license had expired with his death. The shop's commercial insurance had lapsed on December 1st. There was no registered operator. On paper, the Brannock Boatwright Shop was not a business. It was an uninsured, unlicensed structure containing power tools, volatile materials, and a partially constructed vessel. On paper, it was a liability. Cole put the documents down and looked at Titan, who was lying on the motel bed with his chin on his front paws, watching. Firmly. On paper. Pause. Quietly. We don't exist either. He called Walt. Firmly. Dale sent an inspector. Harold Metz, County. Not a bad man, but not an independent one either. Firmly. Can I pass? Structural. Maybe if you replace the boards Titan found and fix the panel box on the south wall. The one with the exposed wiring. Zoning. That's harder. You need the shop classified as active commercial use, which means a registered business, liability insurance, and a licensed operator on file. The boat is ongoing work. Quietly. Not without a boat right on the permit. Pause. Slowly. Cole, this is how Dale operates. He doesn't threaten, he files. And filing doesn't leave a mark. It doesn't make enemies. It makes records. And records, once they exist, have a life of their own. You're saying he's done this before? I'm saying the Olson family had a barn inspection 6 weeks before they sold. The Hedstroms had a septic compliance review. The Nyquists had a shoreline setback audit. Pause. Slowly. Every one of those reviews was filed by a concerned citizen through the county office. Every one of them resulted in compliance costs the families couldn't absorb. And every one of those properties ended up in Dale's portfolio within 90 days. Long pause. Cole hung up and spread the documents across the table. He reread the filing date on the zoning complaint. The county clerk's stamp read October 3rd. Long pause. Anxious. His father died October 7th. 4 days. The complaint was filed 4 days before Thomas Brannock's heart stopped in a truck outside the post office. Cole had worked enough hostile environments to know that timing alone proved nothing. He also knew that in those same environments, 4-day windows between administrative pressure and physical consequence were rarely accidental. Titan lay on the motel bed with his chin on Cole's knee. When Cole stopped reading and went still, the dog opened his eyes and bumped his nose once against the back of Cole's hand. Tender. Not comfort exactly. Just a reminder that a hand doing nothing was not doing anything useful. And a dog trained to detect threats had limited patience for a man who sat too long with paper instead of acting. Exhales. Firmly. 4 days. Pause. He set it to the room. Titan's nose stayed warm against his knuckles. Drawn out. The number sat in his chest. It would not move. Long pause. March 4th. The Lakemont Public Library was a red brick building on Main and Elm, 1-story, flat roof, built in 1952 with Carnegie funds and renovated once in 1987. The basement smelled like heating oil and old paper. Nora Lindgren met him at the front desk at 9. She was 38, slim, light brown hair pulled back in a clip, reading glasses on her forehead. Gray wool cardigan, white blouse, dark jeans, boots meant for weather and not decoration. Her face was composed and careful, the face of a woman who dealt in records and had learned that most people preferred their information softened or incomplete. A small gold ring sat on her right hand, not her left. Quietly, the county filings are downstairs. I pulled the lakefront corridor transactions this morning. Thank you. She led him to the basement. Fluorescent lights, metal shelving, banker's boxes labeled by year in a square, precise hand. The table was already set with 4 boxes, and a county plat map waited at the corners. Curious. They worked for 2 hours. Cole went through each transaction the way he had been trained to process field intelligence. Chronological, cross-referenced, verified against source. Name, date, parcel number, assessed value, sale price, buyer entity, seller. He laid them out on the table in a timeline, left to right, earliest to most recent, and marked each one with a small pencil note. Purchase price, as a percentage of assessed value. Nora worked the other side. She pulled the corresponding county assessor reports for each parcel and laid them alongside Cole's transaction records. She did not ask why he organized information this way. She simply matched his method, as though parallel processing were a language she already spoke. Within 90 minutes, the pattern was visible. Dale Erickson, through 3 different LLCs, Erickson Development Group, Lakemont Holdings, and North Shore Equity, had purchased 4 lakefront parcels between 2017 and 2023. Every sale was below assessed market value. The Olson property, 40 acres of lakeshore with a permitted dock, sold for 60%. The Hedstrom lot, 22 acres of mixed timber and shoreline, sold for 55%. The Nyquist parcel sold at 70%, but only because the family retained counsel. The 4th purchase was pending, the Brannock property. He bought the Olson land for 60 cents on the dollar. Quietly. Yes? Nora sat across from him with a county assessor's report open on the table. Quietly. I've been watching it happen for 6 years. One family at a time. Always legal. Always under value. Always against people who couldn't afford to wait or fight. And nobody said anything. Quietly. Dale sponsors the fireworks on the 4th of July. He donated the scoreboard at the high school. He employed 12 people last summer for the marina study. She closed the report. Slowly. People in this town would rather lose their land quietly than fight a man who buys them coffee and remembers their children's names. They both reached for the same corner of the plat map at the same time. Her fingers were cold. His were rough from a week in the shop without heat. They touched briefly over a dotted property line that ran through the Brannock parcel. Both pulled back. Neither said anything about it. Nora restacked the files with the deliberate care of someone returning a room to order. Slowly. My husband was a veteran, Army infantry. He deployed twice. She moved a document from one pile to another without looking at it. He had a difficult time after. He died 3 years ago. Cole did not ask how. The shape of the sentence told him what the words left out, and he understood that silence in this case was not avoidance. It was the only respectful response available. I'm sorry. So am I. Pause. She met his eyes for the first time that morning. Slowly. Be careful with Dale. Pause as firmly. The last person who started asking questions about these land deals was your father. Long pause. Cole gathered his notes into the Write in the Rain notebook and tucked it into his jacket. At the door, he turned back. Nora was already reshelving the banker's boxes, lifting each one with both hands, sliding it into the metal rack with a practiced motion that suggested she had done this hundreds of times and found comfort in the repetition. Why did you pull the files before I asked? She did not look up. Because your father asked me the same questions last September, and I've been waiting 7 months for someone to ask them again. Titan was waiting by the truck. He stood when Cole came out, shook the cold from his coat, and climbed into the passenger seat without prompting. Cole sat behind the wheel and did not start the engine for a full minute. He looked at the library through the windshield. Red brick, flat roof, American flag snapping in the wind. His father had been here, had sat at the same table, had asked the same questions, had seen the same pattern of numbers. And then, 4 days after filing a complaint, his father's heart had stopped in a truck outside the post office. Firmly, Cole started the engine. He drove back to the shop. He did not call Dale. He did not call the lawyer. He carried his sleeping bag inside and began making arrangements for the night. March 4th, night. Cole moved into the shop. He carried a sleeping bag, a camp pad, a flashlight, a thermos, and his father's old AM radio, which still picked up the Duluth weather station after dark if you angled it toward the east window. He also brought the Beretta M9 he had retained from service, legal, registered, stored in a hard case he set beside the workbench. He did not plan to use it. He planned to not need it. The distance between those two positions was something 20 years of service had taught him to measure daily. Titan took to the arrangement without complaint. By 8 o'clock, the dog had run a full perimeter around the building, through the wood line, past the lumber shed, down the driveway to the road, back along the lake shore where the ice met the bank. He came through the side door each time, shook the snow from his coat, and resumed his post beside the main entrance, flat on the concrete, head up, ears working the dark. Cole sat on the camp pad at 11 with the overhead off and the space heater ticking beside him. The shop settled into its night sounds, wood contracting in the cold, the tick of the heater element, wind against the east wall, a branch scraping the roof of the lumber shed in irregular intervals. The boat sat in the center of the floor, pale hull catching the faint orange glow from the heater. It looked, in the dark, like something waiting to be finished, or waiting to be abandoned. Cole understood both conditions. He had brought a book, a field manual on wooden boat restoration he had found in his father's office upstairs. He read by flashlight for an hour. The margins were filled with his father's notes, small, precise handwriting in pencil. Check grain direction before bending. Oak remembers. And scarfing joint, 8-to-1 ratio minimum for structural. And on page 114, circled twice. A boat is a promise. Build it or don't. Half-built promises sink. Pause. At 2:14, he checked his watch by reflex, the way you check your weapon before stepping outside the wire. Titan's right ear rotated, just the right one. The left stayed forward. His body did not move from its position by the door, but the single ear turned slowly toward the road like a dish finding a signal. Anxious, Cole set the book down and moved to the window without standing. Through the frost-edged glass, he could see the county road, a gray line through snow and trees. A pickup truck had stopped approximately 200 meters south of the driveway. Dark color, blue or black, impossible to tell at this distance in the dark. No running lights, no interior glow. Engine idling. The exhaust rose in a faint white column, visible against the snow. No one got out, no doors opened, no flashlight, just the truck, the engine, and the exhaust. Cole noted the time, noted the position, noted the angle. South of the driveway, line of sight to the shop's east-facing windows. He did not turn on a light. He did not move to the door. He watched. 10 minutes passed. The truck pulled away. No acceleration, no urgency. A slow, deliberate departure south. At 4:11, it returned. Same position, same angle, same 10 minutes, same darkness, same departure. At 6:22, a third visit. By then, Titan had adjusted his assessment. The dog no longer raised his ear or shifted his body when the engine sound returned. He simply lay by the door with his eyes open and his breathing steady, watching the road with the fixed, cataloging attention of a sentry who has already classified a contact as hostile and is now recording frequency and pattern for the debrief. Cole understood the distinction. First contact was alert. Second contact was confirmation. Third contact was pattern. And pattern in any operational environment meant the surveillance was organized. He did not sleep again that night. He sat in the dark with the radio off and the field manual closed and wrote in his notebook. 3 boards treated with chemical accelerant. 1 zoning complaint filed 4 days before a death. 1 purchase offer above market value. 1 attorney letter with a 4-day deadline. 4 lakefront parcels acquired below assessed value over 6 years. 1 dark truck running a surveillance pattern on his position at 2-hour intervals. Firmly, in the Army, in the teams, in every ODA he had served with across 3 countries and 6 deployments, they had a name for this phase of an operation. The phase where the terrain was mapped, the anomalies cataloged, the threat axis identified, and you knew the shape of what was coming even if you could not yet see the face behind it. Drawn out. They called it the moment before contact. And contact, once it began, did not stop until one side or the other ran out of ground to hold. Long pause. March 5th. Cole made a decision. He did not announce it. He did not call Walt or Nora or anyone else. He walked into the shop at 6 in the morning with Titan at his heel, stood in front of the boat for a full minute, and then picked up a handplane from the wall. The first stroke along the sheer strake sent a curl of white oak shaving to the floor. Titan sniffed it, dismissed it, and lay down beside the workbench. Pause. Cole assessed the hull the way he had been trained to assess any operational environment, systematically, without sentiment, cataloging assets and liabilities in parallel. The 12 planks his father had fastened on the port side were sound, tight-grained, properly steamed, riveted clean. The starboard side was bare frame. The transom needed skinning. The centerboard trunk was roughed in but not sealed. He estimated 300 hours of work to completion, give or take. At 8 hours a day, that was 37 days. He had 4 before the inspection. He was not going to finish the boat in 4 days, but he could make the shop look active, address the structural violations Walt had flagged, and buy enough time to understand what his father had been building besides a hull. Pause. The smell of fresh-cut oak filled the shop. It was a particular smell, warm, slightly sweet, tannic, and it reached a place in Cole's memory that he had not visited in a long time. Long pause. Fort Bragg, November 2007. The pine forests of Uhari during Robin Sage, the final exercise of the Special Forces qualification course. 18 days in the field, no resupply, no fixed shelter. Cole and his ODA built everything from what the forest offered, lean-tos from fallen pine, tools from stone and stripped branches, a command post from scrap lumber pulled from an abandoned tobacco barn. The instructor, a retired sergeant major named Huff, watched them work for 3 days without comment. On the 4th day, he walked through their camp, kicked the corner post of the lean-to, and when it held, said one sentence. Firmly, any 18 series man can build a house from what the ground gives him. The question is whether he builds it for himself or for the people who come after. Pause. Cole had not thought about Huff in years. He thought about him now, standing in his father's shop with oak shavings at his feet and a boat that was not his and a deadline that was not fair. Titan's nose bumped the back of his knee. Cole looked down. The dog was standing behind him with a scrap of cedar bark in his mouth, picked up from the floor, carried over, deposited against Cole's leg like a delivery. Tender, that's not helpful. Titan dropped the bark, sat down, and looked at him with an expression that, on a human face, would have been called pointed. Exhales. At 10 o'clock, Walt Fenn's truck pulled into the yard. Behind it came a blue F-150, driven by Danny Sir, 52, thick through the chest, ex-Army mechanic, 91B, retired staff sergeant. Danny had served 12 years and come home to Lakemont to run a small engine repair shop that barely covered his mortgage. He had known Thomas Brannock since childhood. Behind Danny came Tommy Kowalski in a flatbed, 48, lean and quiet. Ex-Marines E5, 0311 rifleman. 2 tours Iraq, now working carpentry and seasonal logging. Tommy did not talk much. He worked. Walt carried lumber. Danny carried tools. Tommy carried coffee and a look that said he had showed up because Walt asked, and Walt did not ask lightly, firmly. "We're not rebuilding the whole boat," Cole said. "We're making the shop pass inspection. Panel box, floor joists, contaminated stock. That's the list." Walt pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket and smoothed it on the workbench. A sketch of the shop floor plan, hand-drawn, with the problem areas circled in red. He had made it the night before. It was the kind of preparation that reminded Cole of pre-mission briefings at Bragg. Not because Walt was pretending at military precision, but because 20 years of infantry service left marks on a man that civilian life could not sand away. "Panel box," Walt said, tapping the south wall. "Danny's got this. 12-gauge rewire, surface mount, proper disconnect." Danny was already opening his tool bag. 2 hours, 3 if the conduit's corroded inside the wall. "Floor joists." Walt tapped the east side. "Tommy and I brace from underneath. 2 joists, maybe 3. Shim and sister." Tommy nodded. He had not spoken yet and showed no sign of planning to. Contaminated boards. Walt looked at Cole. "You pull them. I brought replacement stock from my shed. White oak, kiln-dried, same grade your father used." Firmly. "How much do I owe you for the lumber?" Quietly. "Your father gave me the mahogany for my kitchen table in 2019. He wouldn't take $1 for it." Walt folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. "Consider the account settled." Pause. They worked through the morning, the shop filled with the sounds of labor, circular saw, hammer, the grunt of men lifting joists into position, the whine of Danny's drill driving screws into fresh conduit boxes. Titan moved through the work zone with practiced ease, checking each new person once on arrival, then dismissing them, circling the perimeter of the active area every 10 to 15 minutes. He gave Tommy the widest berth, not from hostility, but from the mutual respect of 2 creatures who preferred silence and did not trust strangers to understand it. Pause. At 9:30, Danny pulled a junction box from the south wall and held it up to the light. The housing was cracked. The wiring inside was cloth-wrapped, original to the building. "This is 1968 wiring. Your grandfather installed this." Firmly. "Is it safe?" "It was safe in 1968. In 2024, it's a fire waiting for permission." Danny set the box on the bench. "I need to run new conduit from this junction to the panel. 12-gauge, surface mount. 20 minutes if the wall cooperates. 2 hours if it doesn't." Quietly, "Does the wall ever cooperate?" Danny looked at him. "In my experience, walls are a lot like sergeants. They do what they want, and then pretend it was your idea." Walt, who was measuring a floor joist beneath the east wall, called out without looking up. "I heard that. You were meant to." Pause. Cole pulled the 3 contaminated boards from the lumber rack and laid them across the sawhorses. He marked each one with a red pencil. X across the soft zone, lot number circled, and set them aside, Evidence. Walt's replacement stock was clean. Cole checked each board by hand before slotting it into the rack. Thumb pressure at 6-inch intervals along the full length, nose to the grain at 3 points. The method was automatic. It was also, he realized, the same inspection sequence his father had used. He had watched Thomas do it 1,000 times as a boy and had absorbed the protocol without knowing it had a name. In the Army, they called it battle drill. A sequence repeated until it became reflex. Cole had battle drills for clearing a room, for treating a casualty, for calling in a 9-line medevac. He had not known he also had one for checking lumber. His father had installed it the same way the Army had installed the others, through repetition, without explanation, until the body remembered what the mind had never been told to learn. Pause. Tommy came out from under the east wall with a shim in his hand and sawdust in his eyebrows. He held the shim up to Cole. Firmly, your grandfather used hand-cut shims, cedar. Cole looked at the shim. It was thin, tapered, hand-split from a clear piece of western red cedar. The grain was straight and the cut was clean. It had been sitting between a joist and a sill plate for 56 years, holding the floor level without adhesive, without hardware, without anyone checking on it. Tommy set it on the bench beside the contaminated boards. "That's the difference," he said. It was the most words Cole had heard him say in one sentence, quietly. "Between what?" Tommy looked at the shim, then at the contaminated boards, then at Cole. He did not answer. He did not need to. The shim was honest work. The boards were not. The difference between the two was the difference between the shop Thomas Brannick had built and the thing that someone had tried to do to it. Pause. At noon, Danny was under the workbench replacing a junction box when he straightened and said something that stopped the room. "Your dad was at the county office the week before he died, taking measurements of something. Wouldn't say what." "Measurements?" Cole repeated. "Land records, I figured, or tax maps." He had a big roll of paper under his arm. "I saw him coming out of the clerk's entrance on a Tuesday. I waved. He waved back. Didn't stop." Long pause. Cole looked at the boat, at the 12 planks on the port side, at the bare ribs on the starboard, at the gap between what his father had finished and what he had left undone. Titan had climbed onto the old office chair beside the workbench, Thomas Brannick's chair, the one with the cracked leather seat and the armrest worn smooth on the right side. The dog sat there with his front paws on the seat edge and his head up, as though he had claimed the position and did not intend to negotiate. Warmly, Danny laughed. "He knows whose chair that is." Cole did not move the dog. Long pause. March 6th, the day everything changed. Cole had spent the previous evening going over the boat inch by inch. Not for structural assessment this time, for anomaly. His father had been building a case. The evidence was in the shop. Cole was certain of this now. The question was where. He started at the bow and worked aft. Titan followed, nose at plank level, patient. They checked every fastener, every seam, every joint. Port side, 12 strakes, copper rivets, cedar bungs. Clean. Consistent. No variation in the pattern. Then Cole reached the 9th strake on the port side, 4 feet forward of the transom, and stopped. Pause. The joint was different. Every other plank-to-frame connection on the hull used a standard mortise and tenon. A rectangular tongue fitted into a rectangular slot, glued and pinned. Industry standard. His father had used it on every boat he built for 40 years. But this joint, The one connecting the ninth strake to the fourth frame was not a mortise and tenon. It was a blind wedge tenon. Curious, Cole knew this joint. He knew it the way a man knows his own handwriting, not from study, but from muscle memory. His father had taught it to him when he was 14 years old, sitting at this same workbench on a Saturday afternoon in October 1996. They had used scraps of ash and a small mallet. Thomas had held the two pieces of wood against the window light to show how the grain ran and where the wedge sat, invisible inside the joint. A blind wedge tenon used no glue, no pins, no mechanical fasteners of any kind. The tenon was cut with a slight taper and a hidden wedge slot. When driven home, the wedge expanded the tenon inside the mortise, creating a permanent mechanical lock. From the outside, the joint was invisible. No visible seam, no end grain, no hardware of any kind. You could run your hand along the surface and feel nothing but smooth, continuous wood. You could not open it unless you knew the release angle. The tenon released only when struck on a specific face at a 15-degree offset from the grain direction, a detail his father had demonstrated by holding the scrap at an angle to the afternoon light and saying, quietly, "See where the grain changes direction? Hit it there, nowhere else. If you hit it wrong, you break the tenon and the joint is gone forever." It was not taught in any school. It was not published in any manual. It was a technique Thomas Brannock had learned from his own father, Carl, who had learned it from a Finnish boatwright named Mattila in Duluth in 1961. 3 generations, 3 men. A family signature embedded in wood. Pause. Dale Erickson had a key to the shop. He had access to the boat. He could walk in any time, inspect the hull, examine every joint from stem to transom. But when he looked at the 9th strake, he would see only a seamless plank fastened flush against a rib. No gap, no seam, no suggestion of a cavity. The blind wedge tenon was designed to be invisible to anyone who did not know it existed. Thomas had chosen to hide his evidence behind the one joint on the hull that his enemy could look at 1,000 times and never see. And he had chosen it because he knew, despite 3 years of silence, despite 4 years of absence, despite every letter returned unopened, that his son would come back, and that his son, standing in this shop, looking at this joint, would know. Pause. Titan's nose was on the seam. He had been pressing his muzzle against the plank for 30 seconds, nostrils cycling in the fast detection pattern Cole recognized from years of working beside MWDs in the field. The dog was not reacting to wood. He was reacting to something behind the wood, a change in air composition, a trapped scent, something sealed inside the cavity that his nose could read through 3/4-inch oak. Firmly, such. Titan whined once, short, high, a sound he almost never made, and scratched the plank with his right front paw. One stroke, deliberate. Cole positioned his palm against the face of the 9th strake, 15 degrees off the grain. He struck once with the heel of his hand. The joint held. He adjusted, a fraction left, slightly firmer, and struck again. The tenon released with a quiet wooden sound, like a door closing in a distant room. The plank slid outward 1/2 inch. Behind it, in the narrow gap between the frame rib and the hull lining, was a Ziploc bag. Heavy gauge, sealed twice, wrapped in a clean shop rag that smelled like linseed oil and cedar. Long pause. Cole's hands were steady as he opened it. 20 years of handling ordnance, documents, and evidence in hostile environments had trained the tremor out of his fingers. But when he saw his father's handwriting on the first page, the same small square printing that had labeled every tool on the wall and every plank in the rack, something shifted in his chest that no training could control. Long pause. Cole opened it. Inside were 11 pages, photocopies and originals mixed together, clipped at the corner, annotated in his father's handwriting. The first page was a spreadsheet, 2 columns, assessed value, county, and actual market value, comparable sales. 4 parcels listed, the same 4 Cole and Nora had identified at the library. For each one, the county assessed value was 30 to 45% below the market comparable. The gap totaled over $200,000 across 15 years of filings. The second page was a copy of a county assessor's report for the Olson parcel, signed by Russell Wendt, county assessor, dated 2018. Cole's father had circled the assessed value in red and written beside it. Wendt signed. Dale submitted. Same figures as Hedstrom. Same as Nyquist. Pattern. The third page was a handwritten note, not a letter, just a note, in Thomas Brannock's square, careful printing. Dale files low appraisals through Wendt. Wendt signs without independent verification. Owners receive tax bills based on deflated values. Lower bills, no complaints. When Dale offers to buy, the assessed value becomes the benchmark. Owners think they're getting market price. They're getting 60 cents on a dollar that was already short. Pause. Pages 4 through 9 were copies of tax filings, deed transfers, and assessment reports spanning 2011 to 2023. Each one was annotated. Each annotation followed the same format: date, discrepancy, source, and a single word at the bottom of each page. Filed. As though Thomas had been building a dossier, entry by entry, with the discipline of a man who understood that evidence without documentation was only suspicion. Page 10 was different. It was a letter, unfinished, undated, addressed to the Minnesota office of the state auditor. The first paragraph read, "I am writing to report a pattern of systematic undervaluation of residential and commercial properties in the lakefront corridor of Lakemont, Minnesota, conducted over a period of not less than 15 years, with the knowledge and participation of the county assessor." The letter stopped mid-sentence on the second paragraph. Thomas had not finished it. Page 11 was the worst. A single sheet of notebook paper with one line written in ink, underlined twice. Filed Complaint County Office October 3rd, Dale knows. Long pause. Anxious October 3rd, 4 days before his father's heart stopped in a truck. Cole sat on the shop floor with the pages spread across his knees and the Ziploc bag beside him and the boat rising above him like a monument to a man who had spent 3 years building a case inside the thing he built best. His father had hidden the evidence behind a joint only 2 people in the world knew how to open. One of them was dead. The other was kneeling in a cold shop in February, holding 11 pages that smelled like sawdust and the truth. Pause. Titan sat beside him, not pressed against his leg, not nuzzling his hand, just sitting, upright and still, watching Cole's face with the fixed attention of a dog who had delivered his finding, and was now waiting for the handler to complete the assessment. Firmly, "I heard you, boy." Tender, "I heard you." Long pause. March 6th, afternoon. Cole drove to the library. He carried the 11 pages inside his jacket, against his chest, the way you carry a weapon you do not want visible. Nora was in the basement reshelving county records from the morning's other patron, a retired school teacher researching property boundaries for a fence dispute. She looked up when Cole came down the stairs. Whatever she saw in his face made her set the box down without finishing. What happened? He laid the pages on the table without speaking. Nora sat down, put on her reading glasses, and began to read. She went through each page in order. Spreadsheet first, then the assessor reports, then the handwritten notes, then the unfinished letter. She did not skip ahead. She did not skim. She read the way a person reads evidence, which is to say she read slowly, and she read everything. Cole counted the minutes. 12. Titan lay under the table at their feet, chin on the cool concrete, eyes half closed. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere upstairs, a phone rang twice and stopped. Pause. When Nora finished, her face had lost its color. She removed her glasses and set them on the table beside the spreadsheet. Her hands were steady, but she kept them flat on the surface as though steadiness were something that required conscious effort. Quietly, "This isn't just tax fraud." Her voice was calm and careful and thin in a way that told Cole she was controlling it. If Wendt signed falsified assessments for 15 years, then every property sale in this corridor is tainted. Every tax bill, every deed transfer based on those assessments. The county accepted fraudulent filings as the official record of what this land was worth. I need copies. I'll make them now. Pause. The library's photocopier was old, a Xerox from 2009 that hummed and clicked and produced copies with a faint gray cast along the right margin. Cole fed each page through individually, face down, the way you feed documents through a secure scanner at a SCIF, one at a time, watched, accounted for. Nora wrote a cover sheet on library letterhead. Date, description of contents, chain of custody, her printed name and initials as witness. It was not a legal document. It was a librarian's instinct for provenance, and it was better than most legal documents Cole had ever seen. Pause. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. When the copies were done, Cole placed the originals back in the Ziploc bag. He returned the bag to the blind wedge tenon joint in the boat. It was the hiding place his father had chosen, and Cole had not yet thought of a better one. The copies went to Nora. She carried them to the far end of the basement, past 3 rows of metal shelving, and filed them inside a banker's box labeled Lakemont Cemetery Records, 1952 to 1978. She slid the box back into its slot on the shelf and adjusted the boxes on either side to close the gap. Quietly, "No one has requested that box in 11 years. I checked the sign-out log. This needs to go to the state auditor." Quietly, "Not the county. The county is compromised if Wendt was involved." "I know." Pause. She looked at him across the table. The plat map from 2 days ago was still there, weighted at the corners, the dotted property lines running through parcels that now meant something different than they had 48 hours ago. "You're staying." It was not a question. It carried no expectation and no demand. It was an observation, delivered in the voice of a woman who had spent 3 years learning to observe men carefully and without projection. Firmly, "I don't know how to stay anywhere." Quietly, "Then learn here." Long pause. Titan, under the table, exhaled once. A long, slow breath that carried through the quiet of the basement. Cole looked down at the dog. The dog looked back, amber eyes calm, as if the matter had been settled some time ago, and the humans were simply catching up. March 7th. The inspector arrived at 9. Harold Metz was 55, broad-shouldered, with a gray mustache trimmed close and a county jacket that had seen 15 winters of crawling under porches and climbing into attics. He carried a clipboard, a flashlight, and the resigned expression of a man who had been asked to do a job he suspected was not entirely his own idea. He walked the shop for 40 minutes. Cole followed at a distance, not hovering, not obstructing, just present. The inspection was thorough in the way government inspections were thorough, systematic, documented, uninterested in charm or explanation. Metz checked the panel box first. New wiring, clean disconnect, GFCI outlets, proper grounding. He tested each circuit with a meter. He made a note on his clipboard. He did not say pass or fail. He simply wrote and moved on. He checked the floor joists, got on his hands and knees with a flashlight, and crawled under the east wall where Tommy had sistered the new joists to the old ones. Came back out with sawdust on his jacket and a neutral expression. He checked the lumber rack, ran his hand along 3 boards at random, looked at the lot numbers penciled on the ends, moved to the boat, walked around it once, touched the hull at 3 points, looked at the tools staged on the bench, the shavings on the floor, the open can of sealant. "You've done work in here." "Some. Recent work. This week." Pause. He checked the roof from outside, walking the perimeter with his head tilted back, noting the condition of the flashing and the sag in the ridge beam. He checked the fire extinguisher. Expired, which he noted. He checked the exit doors. 1 functional, 1 blocked by lumber, which he noted. He checked the electrical meter on the exterior wall, the grounding rod, the service entrance cable. 40 minutes, 23 items on the clipboard. Cole counted them from across the room. Metz came back inside and stood beside the workbench. He looked at Cole with the expression of a man choosing his words with care, quietly. "The structural items pass. The wiring is new and clean. The joists are properly reinforced. The roof has deferred maintenance, but it's not imminent." He tucked his pen into his jacket pocket. "The zoning issue is separate from my report, but I'll tell you straight. You need a business registration and a liability policy within 30 days to hold commercial classification. Without those, the next inspector who comes through can shut you down on paperwork alone. I'll file Monday." Pause. Metz looked at the boat again, then at Cole, then at the shop door, where Titan sat watching the driveway with the calm vigilance he maintained whenever strangers were on the property, quietly. "Mr. Brannock, I've been doing this job for 19 years. I've inspected 400 buildings in this county. I know what a routine structural review looks like, and I know what a political one looks like." He adjusted his clipboard under his arm. "Someone wants this place shut down. I received 3 phone calls this week regarding this inspection, 3 calls for a single commercial property review. In 19 years, the most I've ever gotten for one site is 1. Who called?" Metz shook his head. "I can't discuss that. Can't or won't." Quietly. "Take your pick. The result is the same." He walked to the door. Then he stopped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. White stock, county seal, Harold Metz, building inspector, with a phone number and email printed in small type. He handed it to Cole, face up. Then he turned it over. On the back, written in pencil in small, careful letters, "Check Assessor Records 2011 to 2014. Long pause. Curious, Cole looked at the card. Metz was already walking to his truck, clipboard under his arm, boots crunching on frozen gravel. "Mr. Metz, The inspector stopped at his truck door but did not turn around. "Thank you," quietly. "I didn't do anything." He opened the door. The structural items passed. "That's what my report will say. That's all my report will say." He got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the yard, heading north without looking back. Titan watched the truck until it disappeared past the tree line. Then he turned and looked at Cole with both ears forward and his head slightly raised, the posture he held when he expected a command, or had already decided what the next one should be. Firmly, "I know." Cole looked at the card again. 2011 to 2014. The years when the first deflated assessments appeared. The years before Went retired. The years when the pattern started. Run out, the inspector had not done anything. He had done exactly enough. March 8th. Cole and Nora spent 4 hours in the library basement going through county assessor records from 2011 to 2014. The pattern Metz had pointed them toward was worse than the spreadsheet in the boat suggested. During those 3 years, Russell Wendt had signed 41 property assessments along the lakefront corridor. Of those 41, 17 showed assessed values more than 20% below comparable market sales. Of those 17, 4 were subsequently purchased by entities linked to Dale Erickson. But the deeper problem was not the 4 parcels Dale bought. It was the 13 he did not buy. 17 families had received tax bills based on deflated values for years. Lower bills, no complaints, no reason to question a system that appeared to be working in their favor. When any of those properties eventually sold, the assessed value became the anchor for negotiations. Sellers who thought they were getting a fair price were working from numbers that had been bent from the start. Nora had built a separate timeline on a legal pad. 2 columns, one for Wendt's assessment dates and one for Dale's LLC filings. The columns aligned. Every time Wendt signed a below-market assessment, Dale's entity appeared in the county records within 90 days, sometimes as the buyer, sometimes as the interested party in a planning review, sometimes as the applicant for a zoning variance. The system was not random. It was sequential. Assessment, devaluation, acquisition. Firmly. "It's not 4 families. It's 17. Quietly. "At minimum." Nora turned the legal pad so Cole could read her timeline. "That's the lakefront corridor only. Wendt assessed the entire eastern half of the county for 15 years. If this pattern extended beyond the corridor..." "How many total properties?" She paused, closed the assessor's report in front of her. "Hundreds, over 15 years. We'd need access to the full county database to determine the scope." Long pause. Titan lay under the table. He had found Cole's sandwich, turkey on wheat from the diner, left on the chair beside Cole's jacket, and consumed it with the methodical efficiency of an animal who understood that unguarded food in an operational environment was simply a resource awaiting reallocation. The wax paper wrapper lay on the floor beneath the chair, licked clean. Nora noticed first. She looked under the table, then at Cole, then at the dog. Titan returned her gaze without remorse. "Warren, your dog ate your lunch." Cole looked down. "He's efficient. He's a thief. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Pause. "In the teams, we called that tactical acquisition." Quietly, Nora almost smiled. It was the first time Cole had seen her face move in that direction, and it lasted approximately 1 second before the weight of the documents on the table brought it back to center. Pause. The humor lasted 3 seconds. Then Nora closed her notebook and said, firmly, The state auditor's office has a field investigation unit. I looked it up this morning. They handle cases involving county-level assessment fraud. How long? To open an investigation? Weeks, maybe months. They'd need to verify the documentation, interview Wendt, subpoena Dale's financial records. We don't have months. Quietly. No. She met his eyes. We don't. Pause. Cole called the Minnesota office of the state auditor from the library parking lot at 4 in the afternoon. The main line transferred him to a regional office. The regional office transferred him to the field investigation division. He was on hold for 9 minutes, during which a recorded message informed him twice that his call was important. Karen Price answered with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had too many cases and not enough staff. Cole explained the situation in the format he had been trained to use for after-action reports. Location, timeline, evidence collected, suspected parties, supporting documentation. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. No editorializing, no emotion. Price asked 4 questions. Each one was precise. How many parcels? Who signed the assessments? Do you have the originals or copies? Has the current county assessor been notified? Firmly. 4 confirmed, 17 suspected. Russell Wendt signed all of them. I have originals and a secured copy set. The current assessor has not been contacted. The county may be compromised. I can come to Lakemont, not before March 15th. I have 3 active field investigations ahead of yours in the queue. March 15th, 12 days. Frustrated. 12 days of Dale knowing Cole had found something. 12 days of the dark truck on the road. 12 days of a shop with a dossier hidden in a hull and a dog and a deadline that did not care about government scheduling. Firmly, I'll be here, Mr. Brannick. I need to be very clear. Price's voice dropped half a register. Do not confront the subjects. Do not share the documentation publicly or with media. Do not move the originals from their current location. Keep them secure. Understood. Secure means genuinely secure. Not your vehicle, not a bank in the same county, not a location that anyone connected to the county government system can access through normal channels. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Firmly, yes, ma'am, I do. Drawn out. Good. I'll see you on the 15th. If anything changes before then, threats, contact from the subjects, interference with the evidence, call this number directly, not the main line. She gave him a cell number. He wrote it in the Write in the Rain notebook, on a page he marked with a fold. Long pause. March 8th. Night. Cole sat in the shop with the overhead off and the space heater ticking and his father's Bible open on his knees. He had found it that morning in the top drawer of the office desk upstairs. A King James, brown leather, worn soft at the spine. The cover was cracked along the hinge. The pages were edged in gold that had faded to amber. His father's name was written on the first page in ink, Thomas Brannick, 1984. Cole had not opened a Bible in years. He did not open this one for the scripture. He opened it for the margins. Pause. His father had written in the margins the way some men kept journals, not in sequence, not dated, not organized by chapter or verse. The notes appeared on pages he had apparently opened at random over a period of years, each one in the same small, square handwriting, each one addressed to no one and everyone. Page 47, beside Psalm 15. Forgive Dale? Can't yet. Maybe next year. Page 89, beside Proverbs 3. Started the spreadsheet today. 14 years of records. My hands are shaking, not from cold. Page 112, beside Proverbs 11:1. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord. If I don't finish this, give the boat to the town. They'll know what it means. Page 156, beside Ecclesiastes 3. Nora Lindgren at the library knows where the records are. Good woman. Careful. Her husband was Army. She understands what it costs to stay quiet and what it costs to speak. Pause. Page 203, beside Isaiah 40. Cole hasn't called. I understand. I didn't call my father either. The Brannock men love each other badly. We build things instead of saying things, and then we die and leave the things behind and hope someone reads the silence correctly. Long pause. Sorrowful, Cole read that sentence 3 times. Each time it opened something in his chest that he had spent 2 years learning to keep closed. His father had written it in pencil, pressing hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath. The handwriting of a man who was not recording a thought, but carving it. Titan was lying beside the chair. Not on it, not against Cole's leg. Beside it, on the concrete floor, with his shoulder touching Cole's boot. The contact was light. It was also intentional. The dog had chosen the position when Cole sat down, and had not shifted since, as though proximity were a task he had been assigned and intended to complete. Pause. Cole turned more pages. The notes continued. Some were practical: lumber prices, hardware lists, a reminder to replace the space heater filter. Some were financial, a calculation of how much the shop was worth if he sold versus how much it cost to keep running another year. Some were addressed to Cole directly, though they had never been sent. Page 244. I finished the 9th strake today. The joint holds. I tested it 6 times. If Cole comes back, he'll know where to look. If he doesn't come back, well, a boat is a boat. Somebody will finish it. Page 287, beside a verse Cole did not read. The final note. The boat is not a boat. It's the only thing I can build that Dale can't buy. If the evidence is in the boat, Cole will find it. He's the only one who knows the joint. And if he doesn't find it, then I raised a man who doesn't pay attention. And that's on me. Long pause. And his father had spent the last 3 years of his life building a vessel for the truth. He had addressed it, without ever saying so aloud, to the son who had not called in 3 years and had not come home in 4. He had hidden it behind a joint that only 2 people in the world could open, and he had done so with the calm certainty of a man who believed, despite 3 years of silence, that his son would come back, that his son would look, that his son would find it. And Cole had. 3 months late, 4 years absent, carrying a guilt he could not articulate, and a dog he had not known he needed. He had come back to sell a building and found a message instead. Pause. Titan pressed his shoulder harder against Cole's boot. Cole reached down and set his hand on the dog's neck. The thick fur, the warmth beneath, the steady pulse. He held the Bible in one hand and the dog with the other, and he did not speak, because there was nothing to say that the room did not already hold. Long pause. March 9th, 9:15 in the evening. Cole's phone rang. The number was local, a 218 area code, Lakemont Exchange. A woman's voice, shaking, professional, rushed. Mr. Brannock, this is dispatch at Hennepin County Medical Center. We have a Nora Lindgren admitted 40 minutes ago. Car accident on Route 7. She listed you as her emergency contact. She's conscious, but they're running a full trauma panel, and we need... Anxious, Cole was already moving. Jacket, keys, phone in his pocket. The training kicked in before the emotion did. Locate, assess, respond. Nora. Route 7. Hennepin County Medical. 40 minutes ago. Titan scrambled off the floor and launched himself through the shop door before Cole had it fully open. The dog hit the truck bed in one bound and braced himself against the wheel well, facing forward, ready. Cole started the engine. It caught hard in the cold. March nights in Minnesota still dropped into the teens. And he pulled out of the yard at speed, gravel spraying against the lumber shed wall. The county road was empty. No traffic at 9:15 on a Tuesday in early March. The headlights cut through dark pine and snow-walled ditches. Cole drove the limit plus 10, which was as fast as the roads allowed without putting the truck into a ditch. He did not turn on the radio. He did not check his phone again. He drove. Pause. The hospital was 25 minutes away. He made it in 19. The parking lot was half empty. 2 ambulances, a dozen cars, the yellow-lit emergency entrance with its flat institutional glow. He left Titan in the truck bed and went inside. The front desk was staffed by a nurse with a lanyard and a computer screen and the professionally neutral expression of a person who had delivered bad news and good news and no news at all in roughly equal proportion over the course of a 12-hour shift. Firmly, Nora Lindgren, admitted within the hour. Car accident on Route 7. The nurse typed the name, waited, typed it again, differently. Last name first, then first name first. Waited, scrolled, looked at the screen for a long time. I don't have a Nora Lindgren. No admission under that name tonight. Check again. Sir, I've checked twice. There's no patient by that name in the system. No trauma intake in the last 2 hours. No MVA reported on Route 7 this evening by County Dispatch. Long pause. Anxious, Cole stepped back from the desk. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and burnt coffee. A television mounted in the corner played a weather forecast on mute. He called Nora. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was calm, ordinary, undamaged. The voice of a woman sitting in her kitchen at 9:45 on a Tuesday evening, probably with a cup of tea and a book, completely unaware that her name had just been used to empty a building. Cole, what's wrong? He did not explain. Not yet. Not on the phone. Where are you? Home. I'm reading. Why? What happened? Lock your doors. All of them. Don't go outside. I'll explain when I get back. Pause. He hung up, stood in the hospital parking lot with the phone in his hand and the cold pressing against his face. Titan was standing in the truck bed, rigid, ears locked forward, facing south toward Lakemont, toward the shop. The dog had classified the situation before Cole had finished the phone call. Cole got in the truck and drove back. Faster this time. 19 minutes became 15. The headlights cut through empty road, black pine, snow. His hands on the wheel were steady. His breathing was controlled. 20 years of training held. Assess, prioritize, execute. But under the training, in the place where discipline met instinct and instinct met the thing he had not yet named, something cold and clean was moving through his chest. They had used her name. They had used the one person he had started to trust, the one person whose name on a hospital dispatch call would make him leave the shop immediately, without question, without checking. That was not random improvisation. That was intelligence. That was a profile. Someone had studied him well enough to identify his vulnerability and weaponize it in a single phone call. Long pause. The shop. The yard gate was closed. Not unusual. He closed it every night. But when Cole reached for the chain, it was not his chain. New wire, galvanized steel, wrapped tight with pliers, the ends twisted in a way that spoke of haste and purpose. Someone had sealed the gate from outside after he left. Anxious inside, Titan was barking, not the controlled alert bark of detection work. A sustained, urgent sound. The sound of a dog who had been locked inside a building he could not exit and who had heard things happening that required his presence elsewhere. Cole cut the wire with the multi-tool on his belt. The gate swung open. He crossed the yard at a run and hit the shop door with his shoulder. Pause. The lights were off. The space heater was overturned. The workbench had been swept clear. Tools on the floor. Varnish cans rolled against the wall. In the center of the room, the boat sat in its cradles, and across the entire upper surface of the hull, the deck framing, the gunnels, the transom, someone had poured industrial black paint. It ran in thick, wet streaks down the cedar and oak, pooling on the floor beneath the cradles, filling the shop with the sharp, choking smell of enamel. Long pause. Cole moved to the starboard side, the 9th strake, the blind wedge tenon. The plank had been pried open, not with the correct angle, with a crowbar. The wood was splintered at the joint, the tenon cracked and displaced. The cavity behind it was empty. Pause. The Ziploc bag was gone. The 11 pages, the spreadsheet, the assessor reports, the unfinished letter to the state auditor, the final note. Filed complaint county office, October 3rd. Dale knows. Gone. Anxious, Cole stood in the middle of the shop. Black paint dripped from the hull onto the concrete in slow, steady drops. The smell was thick enough to taste. Titan had stopped barking. He was beside Cole now, pressing his shoulder against Cole's hip. Not comfort, not greeting, but the sustained physical contact of a dog anchoring his handler against the pull of something worse than pain. Long pause. Sorrowful. The Bible was on the floor, thrown there, spine bent, pages fanned open against the concrete. It had not been taken, it had been discarded. Cole picked it up. The spine was cracked, but the binding held. The pages were creased, but intact. His father's handwriting was still there, in the margins, small and square, and certain. He held the book against his chest and looked at the boat. The black paint was still wet. It glistened in the flashlight beam. Everything his father had built, the hull, the evidence, the 3 years of careful work, was defaced and emptied in the time it took to drive to a hospital that held no one he knew. Pause. They had used Nora's name. They had known exactly which name would make Cole leave. They had studied him well enough to weaponize the one thing he had begun, despite himself, to care about. Drawn out. That meant staying was no longer only about a boat. Long pause. March 10th, 6:14 in the morning. Cole called Nora from the shop floor. He was standing in the middle of the wreckage with black paint drying on his boots and Titan pressed against his left leg. And he said 3 words. Firmly, check the box. Pause. He heard her move through the house, a door opening, stairs, the sound of fluorescent lights clicking on in a basement, the scrape of a banker's box being pulled from a metal shelf, cardboard lifting, paper rustling. Quietly, "It's here." Her voice was steady. "Everything. The copies are here." Exhales. Cole closed his eyes. He leaned against the hull of the ruined boat and let the back of his head rest against oak that his father had shaped by hand. The paint smell was heavy and chemical. The originals were gone, but copies, properly documented, properly witnessed, properly stored in a location the county system could not reach through normal channels, were sufficient for a preliminary investigation. Karen Price had said so. Copies would be enough. Cole. Nora's voice came through the phone with a quality he had not heard before. Not fear, not anger. Something closer to the sound a person makes when they have been holding something carefully for a long time and have just been told they can set it down. "Are you safe?" "I'm in the shop." "Are you safe?" Firmly, "Safe enough." Quietly, "I'm coming over." "No, stay home, lock the doors. I'll come to you in the morning." Pause. He hung up. The shop was dark except for his flashlight beam, which he set on the workbench, pointing at the ceiling to scatter the light. The boat sat in its cradles. Black paint streaked the gunnels and transom in thick, wet runs, pooling on the concrete beneath the cradles in dark puddles that caught the reflected light and held it. The hull itself was intact below the sheer strake. The planking was undamaged at the waterline. The keel was sound. The 9th strake was splintered at the blind wedge tenon joint where someone had driven a crowbar into the seam without knowing the release angle, cracking the wood along the grain and displacing the tenon his father had cut to a tolerance of 30/2 of an inch. But the plank itself had held. The frame behind it was unmarked. The hull structure was complete. They had found the hiding place. They had taken the 11 pages. They had poured industrial enamel across the deck framing and swept the workbench clear and overturned the office upstairs. But they had not destroyed the boat itself, because 22 feet of white oak hull bolted to steel cradles on a concrete floor was not something you could remove or demolish in the 35 minutes between a fake phone call and a fast return. It was too heavy, too solid, too much his father's. The boat was damaged. It was not destroyed. Pause. Cole sat on the shop floor with his back against the starboard side of the hull and his flashlight aimed at the ceiling. Titan lay beside him, close enough that Cole could feel the heat of the dog's ribs through his jacket sleeve, but not leaning, not nuzzling, not performing comfort. Just present. The kind of proximity that required no explanation and offered no commentary. A body beside a body in a dark room. Both of them awake, both of them still. He ran an inventory. The originals were gone. The copies were at the library, in a box labeled Lakemont Cemetery Records, 1952 to 1978, that no one had opened in 11 years. The state auditor was scheduled for March 15th, 5 days from now. The Bible was on the floor near the office door, spine cracked, margins intact. The boat was standing. The dog was beside him. His phone connected him to Nora, to Walt, to Karen Price in St. Paul. He ran a second inventory. The 11 pages his father had hidden behind a joint that took 2 hands and 40 years of family knowledge to open were gone. The physical evidence that could have been tested for fingerprints, paper age, ink composition was gone. 3 years of Thomas Brannock's careful, methodical, solitary work had been pulled out of the hull in less than a minute by someone with a crowbar and no understanding of what they were breaking. But copies with a documented chain of custody, witnessed by a town librarian and stored outside the county system, were sufficient for a preliminary investigation. Karen Price had confirmed this. The originals would have been stronger. The copies would do. Pause. Cole picked up the Bible from the floor. The spine was cracked along the hinge, but the binding held. He did not open it. Tonight, the margins would say too much. He set it on the workbench beside the flashlight and the Write in the Rain notebook and the empty thermos. Then he called Walt Fenn. Long pause. Walt answered on the first ring. He did not sound like a man who had been asleep. He sounded like a man who had been waiting for a call he expected to come. Firmly, they hit the shop. How bad? Paint on the hull, office tossed, originals taken from the boat, but the hull is sound and Nora has the copies. The copies are secure? Library basement, box nobody's touched in 11 years. Pause. I'll be there at 8. Danny and Tommy too. Walt? Yeah. Firmly. They used Nora's name. Fake hospital call. Dispatch voice, hospital name, route number, the whole package. Professional. Long pause. Quietly. That means they've been watching you longer than a truck on the road. Walt's voice was flat and measured. That means someone local. Someone who knows who you talk to, where you go, and who matters enough to get you out of that shop at a dead run. I know, quietly. Who else knows about Nora? Everyone in town knows I've been at the library. Everyone in town knows you've been at the library doing research. Not everyone knows she's the one you called at 6 in the morning when you found the documents. Not everyone knows she's keeping copies. Walt's voice dropped. Dale knows. Pause. Cole. Walt paused. When he spoke again, the infantry sergeant was gone from his voice. What was left was a 64-year-old man who had buried a best friend in October and was now talking to that friend's son at 3 in the morning. Your father spent 3 years building that case alone. He didn't ask for help. He didn't tell me what he was doing. He didn't tell Nora. He carried it by himself because he thought that was safer. And maybe it was, but it also meant that when his heart stopped, nobody knew where to look. Pause. What are you saying? Quietly. I'm saying you don't have to do this alone. I'm saying your father tried and it killed him. I'm not saying it killed him literally. I'm saying the weight of carrying something alone for 3 years is the kind of weight that breaks things inside a man that don't show on a medical chart. Pause. Slowly. You've got people, Cole. Use them. Firmly, I am. Quietly. No, you're not. You're letting people help with the boat. That's not the same thing. Long pause. Cole closed his eyes. Walt was right. He had accepted labor, hands, tools, lumber. He had not accepted what came with it. In 20 years of special forces, he had operated in 12-man ODAs where trust was not optional. It was structural. You did not function without it. But trust in an ODA was bounded by mission parameters. It had rules. It had limits. It had an end date. Trust in a town. Trust with a woman. Trust with an old man who had known your father better than you had. That was unbounded. It had no mission parameters. It had no end date. And for a man who had spent 2 years practicing the art of transience, unbounded trust felt more dangerous than any compound he had ever entered. Firmly, I hear you. Quietly, I know you do. Question is whether you'll do anything about it. Pause. He hung up. Then he called Nora back. She answered immediately. She had not gone back to sleep. Cole? I should have told you about the documents when I found them. I should have told you what the risk was before I asked you to store copies. I put you in the middle of this without giving you the full picture, and that was wrong. Long pause. Quietly. I've been in the middle of this since your father walked into my library in September and asked me to pull land records. Her voice was calm. The only thing that changed tonight is that someone else noticed. Nora? I'm fine. My doors are locked. I have a phone and a neighbor who's a light sleeper and a very clear understanding of what I'm involved in. Pause. Quietly. The question is whether you're fine. He did not answer. Quietly. Cole, are you fine? Firmly. I will be. Quietly. That's not the same thing. No, it isn't. Long pause. He hung up. Titan lifted his head from the floor, looked at Cole, and set his chin back down. His eyes stayed open. His ears stayed forward. He was not sleeping. He was standing watch in the only position available to him, which was lying on a cold floor beside a man who had been outplayed once tonight, and was now, for the first time since arriving in Lakemont, allowing himself to consider the possibility that outplayed did not have to mean alone. Long pause. March 10th, 8 in the morning. Walt arrived first. He walked through the shop without speaking, looked at the paint on the hull, looked at the splintered ninth strake, looked at the overturned office, and looked at Cole. Firmly. Originals are gone. Copies are safe. The boat is standing. Walt nodded once. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. Danny, Tommy. A number Cole did not recognize. By 9:30, 6 people were in the shop. Danny Sir, Tommy Kowalski, Bert Halverson, 55, house painter, white mustache, hands permanently stained with primer, a man who had been removing paint from surfaces for 30 years, and had opinions about solvents that he expressed with the quiet authority of a specialist. Darlene Teague, 60, owner of the Lakemont Diner, who arrived with 2 thermoses of coffee and a paper bag of ham sandwiches and set them on the workbench with the efficiency of a woman who had been feeding people in crisis for 3 decades and did not require instruction. And Helen Fenn, Walt's wife, 62, retired school nurse, who walked in, assessed the damage in a single sweep of her eyes, and said one sentence. Firmly, we're going to need turpentine, a lot of it. No one had been called to a meeting. No one had been recruited or persuaded or asked to sign anything. Walt had made 3 phone calls. Each of those people had made 1 more. And by 9:30, the shop held 6 volunteers, 2 thermoses, a bag of sandwiches, and the particular energy that fills a room when people who have watched something happen to their town for years are finally given a specific physical task to do about it. Pause. They stripped the paint. Bert led the work, directing the others with the calm precision of a foreman. Mineral spirits first, applied with cotton rags, working in small sections to lift the enamel without driving it deeper into the grain. Danny and Tommy took the transom, the hardest section, where the paint had pooled in the carved letters Thomas had begun to incise along the upper rail. 4 letters, L-A-K-E. Whatever the full name was, Thomas had not lived to carve it. Walt handled the gunnels. Cole worked the deck framing, bow to stern, systematic and silent, the same approach he had brought to every task since arriving in Lakemont. Helen cleaned the office upstairs, righting the desk, resorting the files, sweeping broken glass from a picture frame that had held a photograph of Thomas and Cole standing beside a finished hull in 1998. She set the photograph on the desk without comment. Cole found it there later and did not move it. Titan held the door. He had positioned himself in the threshold at first light, lying flat with his head up and his eyes on the driveway, and he had not moved since. Every vehicle that passed on the county road received his full attention for exactly as long as it took to classify it and dismiss it. He was not expecting Dale. He was not expecting anyone in particular. He was performing the function he had been bred, trained, and deployed to perform, securing the perimeter while his people worked inside. Pause. By noon, most of the paint was off. Bert ran his hand along the sheer strake and nodded. The grain's fine. Stain will sand out. This is good oak. Your father knew what he was buying. Cole looked at the 9th strake. The blind wedge tenon was destroyed beyond repair. The joint cracked where the crowbar had split the wood along the grain. But the plank itself was sound. He could cut a new tenon. He could reset the joint with a standard mortise and pin. The joint did not need to hide anything anymore. It just needed to hold a plank against a frame and keep the water out. Then the problem announced itself. Tommy had been inspecting the keelson, the structural brace running along the top of the keel that distributed load across the hull frames. He came out from under the boat with sawdust in his hair and an expression that, on a man who rarely spoke, communicated considerable concern. Firmly, "Keelson brace is cracked. Starboard side, 4th frame. The paint seeped through a deck seam and got into the epoxy joint. The solvent broke the bond." Cole looked. A hairline fracture ran through the keelson brace at the point of maximum stress. Without a sound, keelson, the boat could not take water. It would flex under wave load, open its seams, and eventually break its back. "We need a replacement. White oak, 6x2, minimum 8 feet. Straight grain. No defects." Walt shook his head. "I don't have stock that dimension. Nearest marine-grade supplier is Duluth, 3 hours each way. We don't have 6 hours. Long pause. Cole looked at the shop floor. The old-growth white oak floorboards, laid by his grandfather Carl Brannick in 1968, ran the full length of the building. Tight-grained, aged 60 years, kiln-dried by 6 decades of Minnesota heat and cold. Harder and more dimensionally stable than anything a modern lumber yard could provide. His father had walked on these boards every working day for 40 years. His grandfather had nailed them down the year he opened the shop. 3 generations of Brannick men had stood on this wood and built things from other wood, and never once considered that the floor itself might be the best lumber in the building. Firmly, the floor. Danny looked down. "You can't be serious. 6x2, 8 feet. Original white oak. 60 years of slow curing. Straight grain. No knots, no checks." He pulled a pry bar from the wall. "My grandfather laid this floor. My father walked on it every day. If there's a piece of this shop that belongs in this boat, it's under our feet." Pause. He pulled 2 floorboards from beneath the workbench, driving the pry bar under the tongue and levering upward. The nails came out clean, the square-cut originals that Carl Brannick had driven in 1968, releasing from the joists with a sound like a single note on a stringed instrument. The wood beneath was pale and flawless. The grain was uniform. The surface, protected from light and wear for 60 years, was the color of raw honey. Tommy measured. Danny cut on the table saw, running the boards to exact dimension. Cole shaped the scarf joint with a hand plane and a rasp, beveling the mating surfaces at the 8-to-1 ratio his father had noted in the margins of the boat-building manual in the office upstairs. The feathering was precise. The hollow was slight, just enough to seat the epoxy without trapping air. It was not a technique Cole had invented. It was one his father had used on every hull repair for 30 years, and his father had used it because his father had taught it to him. Danny watched Cole work. After 10 minutes, he said, quietly, "Your dad used that same scarf joint on the Peterson's hull in 2009. Same angle, same plane marks." Cole did not stop working. "He taught me." "I know he did." Danny paused. He leaned against the workbench and crossed his arms. His face had changed. The mechanic was gone. What was left was a man in his 50s, standing in a dead friend's shop, watching that friend's son use a dead friend's technique on a dead friend's boat. Quietly. "I can see him in your hands, Cole. Same grip on the rasp, same elbow angle. He used to keep his left foot forward when he planed, same as you're doing right now." Cole's hand slowed on the rasp. He did not stop, but he slowed. Quietly. "He talked about you. More than you probably think. Not in a sad way. Not, 'my son doesn't call' kind of talk. Just, he'd mention you. Cole would know how to fix that. Or Cole saw worse than this in Kunar. Like you were still in the room. Like you just stepped out." Long pause. Tender Cole set the rasp down. He looked at the scarf joint he had just cut. The mating surface was precise, the hollow imperceptible to the eye, the angle exact. It was his father's technique executed by his father's son using wood from his grandfather's floor. 3 generations of Brannock men in one joint, none of them able to say to each other in words what they had just said in wood. "I should have come back sooner." Quietly. "Yeah." Danny picked up the epoxy tube and handed it to Cole. "You should have, but you're here now. That's what the boat knows." Pause. Helen came down from the office carrying the photograph she had found in the broken frame. Thomas and Cole, 1998. Thomas in a flannel shirt with sawdust on the shoulders. Cole at 16, tall and thin, holding a hand plane, squinting into the sun. Behind them, a finished hull. A 14-footer, the first boat Thomas had let Cole plank by himself. She set the photograph on the workbench without speaking. Danny looked at it. Walt looked at it from across the room. Tommy glanced once and went back to the keelson. Darlene, who had been refilling thermoses, stopped beside the bench. She picked up the photograph and held it at arm's length, the way people over 50 hold things they want to see clearly, warmly. "Lord, look at him. 16 and already as stubborn as his father." She set the photo down. "Thomas would have hated this. All of you here, fussing over his boat. He would have said he could do it himself." Quietly, Walt said, "He did say that. For 3 years. And where did that get him?" Pause. No one answered. The question did not require one. Darlene poured herself the last cup of coffee from the second thermos and drank it standing beside the boat, looking at the hull as if she were reading something written on it that the rest of them could not see. Long pause. The keelson held. Tommy tested it with a load bar across the frames, pressing at the 4th station, listening for flex or complaint. Nothing. The brace was made from the floor Thomas Brannock had walked on for 30 years, shaped by the son he had not spoken to in 3, joined with a technique passed down through 3 generations of men who had learned to say things through wood that they could not say to each other's faces. Pause. Nora arrived at 2 with the copies in a manila folder and a 3-page summary she had written for Karen Price. Timeline, evidence inventory, chain of custody, typed, formatted, footnoted with source references for each document. It was more thorough than most intelligence briefs Cole had read during 20 years of service. She had written it in one night at her kitchen table after locking her doors. She looked around the shop, at the stripped hull, at the new Kielsen brace, at the 8 people working in a building that had been vandalized 12 hours ago and was now louder and more alive than it had been since Thomas Brannock died. Quietly, "You fixed the Kielsen." The floor fixed the Kielsen. She looked at the gap in the floorboards beneath the workbench. 2 boards missing, the joists and gravel visible underneath. "Your grandfather's floor. It was the best wood in the building. Took us 56 years to figure that out." Pause. Nora set the manila folder on the workbench beside the photograph. The 2 objects sat side by side, a picture of a father and son building a boat in 1998, and 11 pages of evidence that the father had spent his last 3 years hiding inside a boat he built alone. Past and present on the same bench, separated by 26 years and a truth that had nearly been destroyed. She also carried a printed email. Karen Price, Minnesota Office of the State Auditor, Field Investigation Division. Subject line, Brannock Matter, Schedule Update. Body. Arriving March 12th, moved your case to priority status. See you at the site. 3 days early. Cole read it twice. Firmly, she moved it up. Quietly. I called her yesterday morning, after the break-in. I told her what happened to the originals. She said destruction of evidence in a filed complaint constitutes obstruction. That moved us from the general queue to the priority list. Cole looked at Nora. She stood in the shop with paint solvent in the air and 8 people working around her and a folder of evidence in her hands. And she did not look like a librarian. She looked like a woman who had been holding a line for 3 years and had finally been given reinforcements. Firmly, "Thank you." She nodded. Quietly, "Your father would have liked her. Price. She asks the right questions." Pause. Darlene refilled everyone's coffee. Bert sanded the last paint stain from the transom. Tommy tested the Kielsen one more time. Walt stood by the door watching the road, hands in his jacket pockets, the same stillness he had probably carried on roads in Kuwait and Mogadishu 30 years earlier. Warmly, 8 people in a boatwright's shop in March. The Kielsen held. It was made from the floor his father had walked on for 30 years. Long pause. March 12th. The boat went into the water at 10 in the morning. They trailered it to the municipal launch at the south end of the lake, where the ice had retreated 50 yards from shore, and the water was black and still and cold enough to stop a heart. Walt's truck pulled the trailer. Danny drove the flatbed with the cradle supports. Tommy handled the launch lines, standing knee-deep in water that was 34 degrees, holding the bowline without comment or complaint, because Tommy Kowalski had done 2 tours in Anbar province, and standing in cold water was not on his list of hardships. Cole stood at the ramp with Titan beside him and watched the hull slide backward off the trailer and settle into the lake. The boat floated. Long pause. It sat low and level, the water line exactly where Thomas Brannock had scribed it with a pencil and a flexible batten 18 months ago. The oak and cedar took the cold water and held. No leaks at the garboard, no weeping at the stem rabbit, no flecks in the frames. The Kielsen made from the shop floor bore the load without sound. The scarf joint Cole had cut from his grandfather's floorboards held firm against the stress of displacement and temperature, and the quiet insistence of a lake that tested everything placed upon it. Titan watched the boat from the ramp. His ears were forward, his body still. He had spent 3 weeks inside a building that smelled like this hull, sleeping beside it, guarding it, detecting the chemicals that had been used to compromise it. Now it was on the water, and the dog observed it with the calm attention of an inspector who had signed off on a project and was watching it perform. Pause. Resolute, Karen Price arrived at 10:45 in a dark blue state vehicle. She was 47, lean, short gray-brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, navy blazer over a white shirt, flat shoes, leather portfolio. No smile, no small talk. Her handshake said one thing: she was here to work. Firmly, "Mr. Brannock, show me what you have." Cole walked her through the documentation at a folding table Danny had set up near the ramp. He laid out the copies in chronological order, left to right. The spreadsheet, the assessor reports with his father's annotations, Nora's timeline cross-referencing deed transfers and assessment dates, the unfinished letter to the auditor, and Nora's 3-page summary with footnotes and chain of custody documentation. He presented it in the format 5th Special Forces Group used for after-action reports: situation, evidence, assessment, recommendation. No rhetoric, no emotion. Facts in sequence until the pattern was self-evident. Price read. She made notes on a legal pad. After the spreadsheet, she pulled a calculator from her portfolio and ran 3 of the assessed values against the market comparables. After the annotated assessor reports, she went back to the spreadsheet and checked the cross-references. After the unfinished letter, she paused for 10 seconds, looking at the sentence where Thomas Brannock's handwriting stopped mid-word, and then she moved on. She asked 7 questions. Each one targeted a specific link in the chain. Who witnessed the creation of the copies? When were the originals last verified in their location? Has the county assessor's office been contacted? Do you have independent confirmation of the assessed values? Who had physical access to the property between October 7th and February 22nd? Were law enforcement contacted regarding the break-in on March 9th? Is there any direct physical evidence linking the chemical treatment of the lumber to a specific individual? Cole answered each one with dates, names, and facts. On the 7th question, he looked at Titan, who was sitting beside the folding table watching the parking lot. There may be, depending on who shows up today. Pause. The town came. Not a crowd, not organized. Darlene had mentioned the boat launch at the diner that morning, and 3 people told 3 people, and that was how information moved in a town of 800 where everyone knew everyone, and news traveled faster than the mail. By 11:15, there were perhaps 30 people at the launch ramp. Some stood near the water. Some sat in their trucks with the windows down. Gerald Hedstrom, whose family had sold their lakefront parcel to Dale for 55% of market value in 2019, stood near the ramp with his arms folded and his jaw set. He did not yet know what the documents contained. He knew only that Thomas Brannock's son had finished Thomas Brannock's boat, and that a woman from the state was reading papers at a table in the parking lot. Pause. Dale Erickson arrived at 11:30. He came in the silver Tahoe, parking at the far end of the lot, engine off. He sat in the vehicle for 4 minutes before getting out. Cole counted. When Dale stepped out, he was wearing the charcoal wool overcoat, the same one he had worn to the shop on March 1st. The same one he had worn when he told Cole about the birdhouse with 11 nails. Polished boots, leather gloves. He walked toward the ramp with the measured stride of a man who had decided that absence would look worse than presence and that whatever was happening, he would face it standing. Greg Holt, the attorney, walked 2 steps behind him. Long pause. Resolute. Dale stopped 10 feet from the folding table. He looked at the boat on the water, floating level and clean. He looked at the papers spread across the table. He looked at Karen Price and the state ID badge on her lanyard. Then he looked at Cole. Slowly, "Your father was my best friend, Cole." Firmly, "Then you should have told me the truth when I got here." Pause. Something moved across Dale's face that was not rehearsed and not managed. For a moment, he looked like what he might have been 30 years ago, before the debt and the LLCs and the years of buying land from people who could not afford to wait. He looked like a man standing in a parking lot at the edge of a frozen lake, realizing that the version of himself he had been performing for 15 years had just been read by 30 people and a woman with a state badge and a legal pad. Slowly. "I tried to stop it. After the first 3 years, I tried. The assessments were already filed. The sales were already closed. Went was in too deep to walk back. I couldn't undo it without undoing everything. And everything included people I owed money to who would not have been understanding." Pause. Then Titan moved. The dog had been sitting beside Cole since the Tahoe pulled into the lot. Still, quiet, ears forward, cataloging every movement and sound within his operational radius. But when Dale stepped closer, when the distance between the 2 men closed to 8 feet, Titan stood. He did not growl. He did not bark. He did not show teeth or raise hackles or perform any of the dramatic behaviors people who did not know dogs associated with aggression. He walked forward, directly toward Dale, with a deliberate, unhurried purpose that made every person near the ramp go still. He stopped in front of Dale and pressed his nose into the front panel of the charcoal wool overcoat. One long inhale, then another, then a third, deeper, his nostrils flaring in the rapid cycle sampling pattern Cole had watched him perform over ordnance caches in Kandahar, chemical stores in Helmand, evidence lockers at forward operating bases in 3 countries and across 6 deployments. Long pause. Dale stepped back. Titan followed. One more press of the muzzle into the wool. One more cycle of fast detection. Then the dog stopped. He turned his head and looked at Cole. Both ears forward, tail rigid and level. The posture he held when he had completed a positive identification and was waiting for his handler to acknowledge the find. Firmly, that coat. Cole's voice was level, the voice he used for confirmed findings. "You wore it when you treated the wood." Long pause. Dale's face went white. The color left it the way color leaves a photograph left too long in the sun. He understood in that moment what had happened. The compound he had used on the lumber, the methyl bromide he had applied to 3 boards in August, had bound to the wool fibers of the overcoat he was wearing. 7 months of dry cleaning and weather and closet storage had not removed it, because methyl bromide at the molecular level bonded to animal fiber the way a stain bonds to heartwood, permanently, invisibly, below the surface of what the eye could see. A human nose would never detect it. Most dogs would not have been trained to. But Titan was a military working dog with 2 tours and 400 detection exercises and a nose calibrated against some of the most dangerous chemical compounds the United States military had ever cataloged. Methyl bromide was not on his official training list. but its chemical profile sat close enough to compounds that were, and his nose did not forget. The crowd at the ramp had gone silent. Gerald Hedstrom stood with his arms at his sides. Irene Foss, the retired postmaster, had her hand over her mouth. Walt stood near his truck, thermos untouched, watching with the absolute stillness of a man who had spent 30 years waiting for something to go right in Lakemont and was now watching it happen in a municipal parking lot on a Tuesday morning. Firmly, Greg Holt took Dale's arm. "We're leaving, now. Do not say another word." Quietly, "Dale." Karen Price's voice carried across the lot without rising. "I will need to speak with you, formally. My office will be in contact within 48 hours. Dale looked at the boat one more time. The hull his best friend had built, the wood his best friend had shaped, the vessel that had carried evidence of what he had done to the lakefront and to the families who lived on it, and to the man who had tried to stop him and who had died 4 days after filing a complaint. He did not speak again. Holt walked him to the Tahoe. The door closed. The engine started. The silver vehicle turned north and disappeared past the tree line. Pause. Titan walked back to Cole. He sat beside the man's left leg and exhaled once, long and slow and final. A job completed. A detection confirmed. A perimeter cleared. Long pause. March 19th, 1 week after the launch. Karen Price called Cole at 8 in the morning. Firmly, "Preliminary findings support a formal investigation. We're subpoenaing county assessor records from 2009 forward. Erickson Development Group's financial accounts are frozen pending review. Russell Wend has agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for consideration. How long for full resolution? Months, possibly a year. The property reassessments alone will require 6 months of independent appraisal work." She paused. Quietly, "Mr. Brannick, there is one more thing. Your father filed a preliminary complaint with our office in September. It came through the general intake line. We flagged it for review. We did not follow up before he died. I wanted you to know that." Long pause. Sorrowful, Cole sat in the shop with the phone against his ear and the space heater ticking beside him. His father had called the auditor in September, before the zoning complaint, before the break-in, before October 7th. Thomas Brannick had done everything correctly. He had gathered evidence for 3 years, hidden it in the safest place he could build, contacted the proper authority through the proper channel, and waited. And the proper authority had flagged his complaint for review and placed it in a queue and moved on to the next file. Quietly, "Thank you for telling me. The investigation will take time, but the documentation your father assembled is the foundation of the entire case. Without his work, without those 11 pages, we would have nothing to build on." Pause. Cole hung up. Titan was lying on the old office chair with his chin on the armrest, watching. The shop was quiet. The paint was gone. The hull was clean. The keelson held. Outside, the lake was opening day by day, the ice retreating from the shore in a slow, steady withdrawal that would continue until May, when the water would be clear and dark, and the boat could sail the full length of the lake for the first time. The investigation would take months, maybe a year. That was the speed at which institutions corrected their mistakes. Cole had operated at a different speed for 20 years. He was learning this one now. He opened the Bible on the workbench, page 203. His father's handwriting, pressing hard enough to leave a ghost of the letters on the facing page. "The Brannick men love each other badly. We build things instead of saying things. And then we die and leave the things behind and hope someone reads the silence correctly. Pause. Cole closed the book. He picked up a hand plane from the wall. There was a starboard side to finish. Long pause. March 20th, morning. Cole drove a new bracket into the shop wall where the old one had been torn loose during the break-in. The wood bit clean. The screw held. He set the level against the bracket, checked it, moved to the next one. The shop was coming back together. Not the way it had been before. The floor had 2 boards missing beneath the workbench where he had pulled the oak for the keelson, and the gap showed joists and gravel underneath. The 9th strake had been replaned and refastened with a standard mortise and tenon because the blind wedge tenon had served its purpose and did not need to hold secrets anymore. The Bible sat on the workbench beside a thermos and a pencil and the Write in the Rain notebook he had carried since Kandahar. And on the shelf beside the workbench, in the same spot it had occupied for 33 years, sat a birdhouse made of pine with 11 nails, where 4 would have been enough. Pause. Danny Sir pulled into the yard at 8 with a load of cedar planking on the flatbed, ordered last week from the mill in Aitken, your old man's account. They still had it on file. What do I owe you? Quietly. Your dad prepaid through June. Danny set the invoice on the workbench beside the Bible. He ordered enough cedar to finish the starboard side, placed the order in August. August, the same month he hid the evidence in the hull, the same month he ordered the materials to complete the boat he was building around the evidence. Thomas Brannock had been 3 moves ahead of everyone in Lakemont for the last year of his life. He had ordered the cedar, hidden the documents, filed the complaint, called the auditor. He had planned for his son to come back. He had planned for the boat to be finished. He had planned for everything except the one event no amount of planning could prevent, which was the moment on October 7th when his own heart decided, without consultation or warning, to stop. Pause. Walt came by at noon. He did not come inside. He stood in the yard with a thermos cap full of coffee and waved once through the open door, the way a man waves who has been stopping by another man's shop for 30 years and does not need a reason or an invitation. Warmly. Nora called the shop line, said the library opens at 9 if you need anything. Firmly. Tell her I might. Walt nodded. He drank his coffee, standing in the cold, looking at the lake through the bare trees. Then he got in his truck and drove away without adding a word, because Walt Fenn had lived in Lakemont for 64 years and understood that some mornings required nothing more than coffee and a wave and the knowledge that tomorrow would hold the same. Pause. At 2 in the afternoon, Cole was fitting the 13th strake on the starboard side when Titan climbed onto the office chair again. The old leather creaked under 81 pounds of German Shepherd. The dog turned once, settled, and rested his chin on the armrest where Thomas Brannock's right elbow had worn the leather smooth over 3 decades of invoices, sketches, phone calls, and the slow daily work of a man who built boats for a living and hid truth for a calling. Tender Cole did not look up from the strake. Yeah, I know. Titan closed his eyes. His breathing slowed. His tail hung over the edge of the seat. Still. Pause. At 4, Cole set down the hand plane. He wiped his hands with a shop rag, folded it, and hung it on the hook where his father had always hung it. He checked the space heater, checked the lock on the side door, checked the keelson one last time, running his hand along the brace made from the shop floor, feeling the grain under his fingertips, tight and hard, and older than anyone left alive to remember when it was new. He opened the Bible one more time. Page 112. His father's handwriting beside Proverbs 11. If I don't finish this, give the boat to the town. They'll know what it means. Cole closed the book. He set it on the shelf beside the birdhouse. Two things his father had built. Both still standing. He picked up his phone. Quietly. Library still open? Quietly. Until 5. I might stop by. You might. Pause. Neither of them said anything else. Neither of them needed to. The sentence had been started. It did not need to be finished today. Long pause. Cole walked to the shop door. The light outside was changing. March 20th in Minnesota meant the sun set later than it had in February, and the quality of that light was different. Softer at the edges, less metallic. The kind of light that arrived when winter began releasing its grip, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small daily concessions. A degree here, a melted inch there, the slow patient turning of a season that would not be rushed. The lake was half open. Dark water and white ice, side by side, the boundary between them shifting a few feet each day. By April, the ice would be gone. By May, the water would be clear enough to see the bottom near the shore. By June, the boat could run the full length of the lake, carrying whatever Thomas Brannock had wanted it to carry when he carved the first 4 letters of its name into the transom and did not live to carve the rest. Titan dropped off the chair. He came to the door and stood beside Cole, shoulder level with the man's thigh, and looked out at the yard and the road and the lake and the town beyond the trees. His ears were up. His breathing was easy. He was not alerting on anything. He was not tracking anything. He was standing in a doorway beside the person he had chosen, looking at a place that had begun, in the quiet way places sometimes did, to look like it might hold them both. Cole stepped out onto the gravel. Titan followed. They walked together down the path to the old municipal dock, where the boat sat tied to the first piling, rocking gently on water that was no longer frozen. The dock planks were wet with snowmelt. The wood was gray and weathered and solid under their feet. Pause. The dog walked beside him without needing to be told where they were going. Long pause. This story reminds us that some things worth building take longer than one life to finish. Thomas Brannock spent his last years constructing not just a boat, but a record of truth hidden where only the right hands could find it. He trusted his son, even in 3 years of silence. He trusted the work, even when the system failed him. And he trusted that building something honest, plank by plank, joint by joint, was worth doing even if he never saw it reach the water. Cole did not come to Lakemont to stay. He came to sell a building and leave before spring. But sometimes the thing you inherit is not a building or a piece of land. It is an unfinished sentence, and the only way to honor it is to keep writing. If this story touched you, take a moment to think about the people in your life who built things for you before you were ready to receive them. The parents who planted trees they would never sit under. The teachers who wrote letters that went unanswered. The friends who held a place at the table long after you stopped showing up. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from. And if you believe in stories about quiet courage, honest work, and the things fathers leave behind for their sons, please subscribe so we can keep bringing you more. Wherever you are tonight, may you find the strength to finish what matters, the patience to wait for the truth, and the grace to stay when everything in you says to leave. God bless you and your family. Long pause.